This is a story called Real Magic, and this is going to be my final story for my story collection. The Universe is a Huckleberry Jam Uncrustable, and I think 17 or 18 other stories. Um, okay, so Real Magic. There are stories told about a time a long time ago in a place far away from here where people lived at peace with nature and with each other. There was magic here and balance and a connection to the divine everywhere you went. Some called it Eden, and others called it Atlantis. And you might think we could never see days like those again, given the nature of modern man. I certainly never thought I would see those days. I grew up after the third modern fall of civilization in the year 2494 in a small nothing garbage patch town west of the ruins of San Francisco. It was farmland, and there wasn't a thing to do except work, get lost in cornfields, and chase sheep. Everyone wanted to leave. But I didn't want to go to New Alturas like everyone else in my high school. Um, Everyone that went there seemed jaded and obsessed with money and started making everything into a competition. The worst kinds of people to hang out with. There had to be another way, and one that didn't involve cornfields either. But where was it? I was about to graduate, and despite my earnest desire to find it, I couldn't find this third way. I was told I either had to go to the city and make money or stay here and work the land. I told my parents I would figure out what I wanted to do, but I just needed time. I was stalling. Stalling for the answer that still didn't come by the time graduation rolled around. And so I wound up going to the local college, studying animal agriculture. And at first, the classes weren't too bad, but after a few months, when the realization that I would be working with sheep the rest of my life, every second turned into an existential crisis of meaning. That's just life, my dad said. And if you're lucky, you'll die at 40, before your back breaks and not be stuck in agony for 50 more years. Cheerful guy, my dad. And so, after holiday break, with the bleak future ahead of me, I started to drive to school, and then I just kept driving. I drove past New Alturas and Old Las Vegas, and sat on a beach on Salt Lake Sea from sunset to sunrise, just listening to the quietness and lost in thought. Then I started driving again. No map, no destination. Just 100 marks in my bank card. The only time I stopped was when I needed more hydrogen fuel. I knew my parents were mad at me, and they'd probably tell me that I need a plan and that I need to grow up if they would see me. And I would ask, what good is having a plan if it's for a life not worth living? But I couldn't run away forever. My past would eventually catch up with me. So after 4 days of driving and sleeping in my car and reminiscing an awful lot about childhood that felt quite banal at the time, I ate a piece of packaged toast at the Circle K's as I waited to refuel, and I looked up. And there was a billboard, a sign that said, "The Secret School of Magic, 2 kilometers ahead." And I don't know if it was the fatigue that made me delirious or the fact that I really thought this was the answer, but after I saw that sign, everything looked different. I drove those last 2 kilometers, and even the air seemed fresher, colors brighter, sounds crisper. I called my father on my car phone and told him I was going to this school that I found out in the middle of the Tucson desert. I think I heard his eyes roll as he sighed, told me I was an idiot. But if I really wanted to do it, he said he couldn't stop me. I told him thanks. He reminded me I was an idiot before he hung up. I parked my car and walked into the desert where a sign and a glistening path welcomed me. The desert turned into a lush forest and filled me with joy. A feeling that I was at home, that everything was taken care of. The path ended, and a broad-shouldered, middle-aged man welcomed me. "We've been waiting for you," the man said. "Really?" I asked. "Really," he said, and led me on. "This is a school of magic after all, and one of our specialties is future seeing. The broad-shouldered man laughed and then apologized. I'm sorry, you hadn't told the punchline yet, he smiled at me while leading me on. I haven't even told you a joke, I said. You will, he said, smiling even wider. He then motioned me towards a huge treehouse made out of what appeared to be a monstrous sequoia. This will be your new home, your dorm, he said. It was charming, not at all like the square farmhouses that were manufactured that I had grown up in. These things looked lived in, homemade, natural. How did you know I'd want to stay? I asked. Future telling, he reminded me. He then pointed to my bed. And your new roommate, Huck, he said, pointing to a really attractive but really bored-looking man lounging on the bed opposite where I had put my shirt on. My name's Coda, I told him. He looked at me, then looked away, said we were going to be late for class. And what class is that? I asked, hurrying behind him. I wasn't looking where I was going and ran into a tree. He sighed. Say excuse me next time, he says. To the tree? I ask. That's George, he tells me, and his feelings are easily hurt. I follow Huck into what appears to be a classroom with tables and chairs on the walls. Charts on the walls, not chairs on the walls. The teacher, a short, fat, balding man, rushes in, taps his desk, and it begins to move. So everything is alive here? I whisper. The teacher laughs. Yes, everything is alive here, as it is everywhere else, even though it's more apparent here than anywhere else. The short man walks back and forth in front of the class. As you can see, life is everywhere, and the history of magic is nothing more than the history of life itself, he told us. What you just saw is the effect of quantum entanglement. Everything lives in relation to everything else in the universe, and that is what makes life, and that is also what makes magic. It's when you control that one key ingredient, the man said, smiling. Of course, knowing that one key ingredient can be tricky, he said. But once you know it, the world and life and death are your oyster. That's hard to say, he said, and tapped the walls. They instantly fell away, revealing a lush forest with huge mushrooms, fairies, elves, and magical creatures. My name is Mr. McRory, by the way, and I have been studying magic the last 20,000 years. I teach magic history because I am magic history, he said proudly. You're joking, I said to Huck, thinking he didn't hear me. I am not joking, he said, and with that he disappeared, and class dispersed. I had a huge grin on my face the whole day. I discovered magic was real, and in my next class I learned the basics of levitation. In the afternoon we made potions to reduce the amount of sleep we would need. But I was confused. Why is there still so much suffering if magic can basically do anything? I asked this to our mathemagic professor, Dr. Carl. Dr. Carl smiled and the students laughed. You'll understand in good time, he told me, refusing to answer the question and referring us back to the dancing numbers on the chalkboard. Huck told me I needed to open my eyes to see what magic really is and not what I wanted it to be. We were sitting in the commons area. It looked like a Roman Colosseum. We were eating food that we had just manufactured out of nothing. I pointed this out to him. Huck changed his posture from blasé and indifferent to death stare. So tell me what magic is, he asked. That's not an easy question, I started to say when Huck laughed and ran back to the dorm. It was a good 10-minute run. It took him 2 and me about 12. How did you get here so fast? I asked, hanging up my sweaty shirt and collapsing on the bed. It's not important, he said. It is, I said. It's amazing. And that's not what magic is about, Huck said as he jumped up to his feet. It's not about tricks. It's supposed to be something more. I'm listening, I say. I don't want to talk about it, he says. You're just like all the others. You get hooked on all this showmanship and you start to get in your head about how much power you have over the world and you won't be able to help yourself. And in the end, you'll give in. Surely there are good wizards out there, I said. And just like in the real world, they're overpowered 10 to 1 by the power hungry, the Machiavellians, the ones doing nothing but lusting for power and glory. That won't be me, I say. So you say, Huck says, and goes back to bed and turns his back to me. A minute later, he is snoring. I tried not to think about what Huck had said, about how all wizards basically become corrupted by power, and I tried to think about the wonders of magic. But the truth is, it was ruined now. Was it really just as crooked as any other human endeavor? Over the next few months, I focused on my studies, determined to be a good wizard and really smart, too, and powerful. I learned how to use alchemy to purify the air, how to use potions to cure cancer. I studied late nights and early mornings and every second in between, and I avoided Huck, who was always giving me sideways glances and sleeping through most of his classes. But one night, near the end of the semester, I was studying by fireflies late at night when Huck noticed me struggling to get a frog to sing. You just have to convince him, Coda, he told me, as if it was just so simple. He focused, and as he did, the frog sang. Not even the professors are that fast, I told him. That's because he wanted to sing for me, Huck said. It's a lot harder if he doesn't want to sing, he said, laying back down on his bed and covering his face with his hood. Can you teach me? I asked. No, he said, and rolled away from me. But you could be so powerful, and you could teach others, I said. Powerful. And that's why I don't want to teach you, because I know that despite your noble, earth-saving veneer, you're all about power, and power is going to corrupt you. He rolled over and glared at me from beneath his hoodie. Good night, Coda, he said, rolling over again, and started snoring. The next day I told the teacher what happened, and I mentioned that Huck had helped me. The teacher smiles, tells me it doesn't matter how I got the frog to sing. It's just important that he did, and that I will pass the class. He then reminded me that Mr. Azalea would be teaching tomorrow. He looked afraid. The guy who introduced me to this place? Why are you afraid of him? He nodded and swiftly exited, almost running down the hall. The next day, the classroom smelled of fire, ozone, and sulfur. I took my seat in the back, as always, and waited for Mr. Azalea. I wonder what the final lesson will be, I wondered aloud. Huck woke up from half asleep and told me that whatever it was, I needed to brace myself. What can I hold on to? I asked. Anything, everything, he said, completely seriously. And then it began. At first, it's just a subtle change in the look of the classroom. Everything around me is shimmering, pulsating, brighter than usual. People and objects are imbued with colored auras. And then the voices start. It sounds like my parents and people I know, and then it gets all distorted and scary. It sounds like demons and insects, and I tell myself, I will be okay. But as I tell myself that, my sense of self falls away. I don't know who I am or where I am. I just know one thing, and that is fear. I am an insect being crushed by a boot. I am a snake being electrocuted. I am being torn to shreds and tortured and sewn back together, over and over. I try to breathe, and for a moment I see other students full of terror and clutching at their desks and at the walls. Stop, Huck yells, and in an instant it all falls away and we all return to class. Are you going to make me? Mr. Azalea asks. He is standing in front of the class in a full wizard's robe. Huck, by contrast, is wearing his usual non-uniform of jeans and a dark hoodie. Yes, I am going to stop you, Huck says. And who's going to help you? These kids? They are with me, aren't you, kids? Or do you want to side with Huck and not know how to endure pain like I just showed you? And if need be, how to subject others to it? You're a monster, Huck said. Magic should never be used the way you were using it. Survival of the fittest, Mr. Azalea said. There's a reason I'm a teacher and you will never amount to anything, despite your skill. The students all stood up and quietly stood behind Mr. Azalea. It was only Huck and me on the other side of the room. Huck looked over at me with disgust. Go ahead and join them, he said. I know you want to. I start to open my mouth and Huck tells me not to bother speaking. He's just a talented but spineless son of talented wizards, Mr. Azalea said. He hates the wizard's world because he can't face reality. The reality? I ask. Yes. Again, the reality that this is a war and in the real world, power and the ability to fight are what matters, he said. So, why do you even bother showing us herbology and spells and stuff like that, I ask. Mr. Azalea laughs. Do you really think we'd get as much interest if we just said what we really do here? I walked away, disgusted by Mr. Azalea, and certain I was never going to be a wizard. Huck was already back at the dorm when I got there, sulking as usual. It took me a lot of time to think of the right thing to say. You could really be a leader to these kids, I said, because not everyone is strong enough to stand up to them. He looked at me cynically and laughed, but then noticed that I was serious. Then come with me. Let's start our own school, one that isn't corrupt, he said. I don't know, I said. I don't know if I'm ready for that, and it's not realistic. And this world of cities, guns, cars, and 40-hour work weeks is, he asks. I'll think about it, I lie. Huck lays back down, starts to read, and completely ignores me. He doesn't say anything, but in hindsight, it all seems so clear. It was clear that this was the moment Huck completely gave up. There was a knock on my door early the next morning. I rub the sleep from my eyes and ask what is the matter. They tell me the library was vandalized and it looked like a pro did it. I turn around to see Huck's reaction to find out that he's gone. His entire bed and all his belongings are gone, like no one had even lived there. As expected, they questioned everyone, but all pretty much knew it was Huck. Mr. Azalea eventually talked to me. I asked him not to torture me because I would talk. He laughs. Do you think it was Huck? He asks. Seems so, I said. Mr. Azalea shrugged. I guess that makes sense, he said. So you're not going to do anything? I asked. It was the act of a child. We will beef up security and we'll be ready if he comes back, though chances are he will not. What did he take or damage, if you don't mind me asking? Of course not, Mr. Azalea said as he leaned back. I don't mind telling you because he didn't really take anything, and the damage he did was very unique to say the least. Which was what? I asked. He replaced the entire history of magic books with pages that just said the word lies, repeated over and over. I looked out the window and sighed. I will miss him, I admitted to Mr. Azalea. And yet you're still here and ready to acknowledge it is time to move on and grow up, aren't you? He asked. I sighed, a little bit louder this time. Oh, come now, he said. Let's not be dramatic. How bad is it to go to the city, become a little world weary, a little cynical, and a little greedy, and rich? It's the way of the world and the way of wizards. I hated that Mr. Azalea knew me better than I knew myself because sure enough, time passed and I became exactly what I hated. I made lots of money, moved to the city, became a powerful wizard, and held out hope that another Huck would come along and change the world. And from time to time, I would look out at that nightmarish hellscape of concrete and glass that I lived in, and I would think of Huck, and I know what he would say if he could see me now. is this life you're living, is it really life if it's, is it this life you're living, is it really life if it's not a life worth living? And he'd be right to ask that. And I wouldn't have it. And I wouldn't have an answer. So that's Real Magic. It's the final story. And I'm going to post the link to the whole book. I don't know if it's going to let me post this whole thing because it's 20 minutes, but hopefully. And another note, I know my voice is kind of scratchy. I'm okay. I'm just having an issue.